Mid-January, the final tax procedures, that is electronic tax invoice regulations 2023, were gazetted that will offer a blueprint on the mandatory eTIMS onboarding. The regulations had changes from the earlier draft regulations. Now, one of the issues was resident businesses with turnover of less than 5 million shillings per annum were exempted from eTIMS generated invoices. The issue of capturing stock levels was also addressed, with the regulations outlining that persons providing services, those that don't meet the 5 million VAT threshold and those with annual turnover of less than 25 million shillings can use a simplified stock data-free system. Further, any resident business that has a withholding tax as a final tax is excluded from generation of eTIMS invoices. That were the regulations actually as clearly outlined. But today, the Kenya Revenue Authority has launched the eTIMS Lite, targeting non-VAT registered taxpayers. Now, one can access this through the eCitizen platforms, and USSD, you can use *222# or web at ecitizen.kra.go.ke. Essentially, those in the informal sector and small businesses are required to electronically generate and transmit their invoices to KRA via the electronic tax invoice management system. Now, the question is, how do we go about this? Where does this leave our small businesses? And to help us have this particular discussion, actually, I'm joined right now by John Courier, who is a partner at Cody Africa. John, thank you very much for making time. Is there a conflict of interest between these two announcements? Because initially, as per the draft gazetted regulations, those turnovering, the businesses turnovering below 5 million shillings were exempted from eTIMS. But when we have the eTIMS Lite, they're saying it is mandatory for these small businesses. Are we having a change of directive there, John?
I would say that this is mainly driven by the fact that, businesses now will not be allowed to claim costs if the person who is supplying them with the services is not registered or is not eTIMS compliant. So it seems there is a change of directive, but mainly driven by the fact that now they will not allow businesses to claim costs that are not eTIMS compliant, or the suppliers of those services are not eTIMS compliant.
So, John, is this a way of sort of cornering businesses that have not been operating on the KRA radar, as we call them, informal businesses? Is this a way of cornering them?
Absolutely. In fact, it's a way. I wouldn't say it's a direct way of widening the net. It's just trying to make the informal more formal. But in the process, it may widen the net. But you're very right. Yeah, it is just a way of making businesses that were previously not somewhat compliant now to start being compliant and under the KRA radar now. Yeah.
Okay. And John, I'm thinking about the way this has been handled, because the whole situation of formalization or bringing more those who are operating outside the tax net to bring them into the system and for them to pay taxes, it's a conversation that we've had for a very long time. What do you think are the pros, and how are businesses, especially these small businesses that are hugely informal, how do you think they will process this directive?
Yeah, so I think the immediate concern for the small businesses is the cost of compliance. I think that is the biggest concern, and that is the majority of the questions or issues that we are getting around that. So just the mere cost of compliance. I think that eventually what we are going to see is a lot of cash money now is going to start changing hands in terms of cash. So I do expect that there will be businesses that will not want to completely be under the tax radar. And what that will mean is that a lot of businesses will revert to cash transactions, cash business. So that could be the biggest con or disadvantage of trying to force businesses to be eTIMS compliant or to come up with this eTIMS Lite that is targeted at the small businesses.
And I mean, it seems sort of, when we look at the conscience, I know sometimes there are those quotes people say corporate has no conscience. We are after the bottom line. But just looking at this, if people will go a long way, as long as to avoid formal transaction, deal with me in cash, I mean, what does that reflect of the business environment? That is one. And secondly, is there a better approach by the Kenya Revenue Authority in this regard? But because they say even with this coming up with eTIMS Lite, it is the issue of making the process easier. Isn't that a way of bringing, not only lowering the cost of compliance, but also making it as efficient as possible?
Yeah, so in terms of trying to, eTIMS Lite definitely, will be easier. It can be operated from the mobile phone. You really don't need to worry about having a computer and so on. So in terms of making business easier, or in terms of compliance, the cost of compliance, I believe it's going to reduce the cost of compliance. But again, we're talking about small businesses, people who are always on the move. They're more conscious about what the sales that they're making, as opposed to declaring this or being on the tax radar. So my view is that I think in terms of making it easier to comply, eTIMS Lite is going to achieve that. But how many of these people would want, how many of the small traders would want to be on the tax radar? And again, just like you've said, there is this notion that when you're in the tax radar, it causes you more problems than good. So how many people want to come, how many people want to come out and be seen? Your sales can be seen live by the Revenue Authority. It's something that has not been tested. It's something that we are yet to see, but I do think that it might increase the under trading, where people trade under cash trading, where instead of me insisting on being paid through formal systems, you find people now insist on being paid through cash. So whereas it's a good move to try and bring as many people on board, it might also be counterproductive in the sense that a lot of people might just decide to keep their transactions away from the Kenya Revenue, site, as it were.
John, being a tax expert, is there a silver bullet when it comes to this issue of taxation, especially the informal sector? Is there a move that can sort of just transform, bring everyone under the net without people trying to find ways around it? That is one. And secondly, I mean, that national conscience, because the goal here, we're being told, if you're not operating under the tax radar, you're not paying taxes, but you're benefiting from the tax investments that you're having in this country. So how can we touch that corporate and national conscience to be able to find ways that each and every one of us can be able to contribute to this national issue of taxation?
Yeah, and I think now you've touched on a very touchy topic. I think it's really being able to see what your tax money is doing. If we could all see what our tax money was doing, then I think that national conscience of wanting to pay and paying taxes would not be such an onerous thing. But to your other question, is there an easier way? Yes, presumptive tax was a very good way of raising tax for the government. So the idea was that every business has a registration, and when you go to pay your registration fee, you pay a presumptive tax. Perhaps at the time it was a percentage of your business license. So that way, then you get everybody onto the tax radar. And I think that even in terms of compliance, in terms of collection, that was an easier method of administering tax or collecting tax, as opposed to having the whole of this eTIMS system. So and especially for the small traders. So I do think that there are different mechanisms that the government can employ. At the moment, we are seeing taxes increasing almost every other time, and taxes in different forms. Yeah, the moment you bring in housing levy, that is an increase in tax, and it's affecting everyone. So perhaps look for a different way of coming up with a tax system, like presumptive tax, if that could be probably widened and implemented better, it would have probably been a better way of making sure that everyone, even in the informal sector, pays some tax. But even more importantly, what is that tax money doing for us is the other question that the government really seriously needs to answer.
Definitely, accountability is very critical, looking at where the money is going and how it is being utilized. Do you think as a country we've been able to create that transparent system, and even borrowing from developed economies, looking at people who are doing slightly better than we are? How can we be able to create a system where everyone is confident that if this is how my tax is utilized and this is how I can actually participate in the utilization of and the decision making of the utilization of these monies?
Yeah. So I think to a large extent the government has tried. So it's possible that we could argue that there is some level of consciousness that the citizens of Kenya need some sort of accountability. But I think we are still very far off, because every time I listen to the news, there's one scandal or the other, some corruption scandal or the other. You look at the county governments, they're not utilizing the money that has been allocated to them, or there's a lot of inefficiency. The central government, the same. So I would say that we are still far off. We can borrow a lot from the developed countries in terms of accountability, coming up with mechanisms where citizens can prioritize projects, and we see those projects actually being implemented and being beneficial to Kenyans. So I would say we have made some positive strides, but we are still very far off from being able to see that accountability being at a high level.
Okay, that's very critical. And now I'm thinking the economy that we're in, analyzing the macroeconomics, how the world is doing and how economically we are doing as a country. When we're making such decisions, is that a factor to consider? Also, just considering that a majority of our businesses, almost 80 to 90%, fall under this MSME category, which eTIMS Lite is targeting. So when coming up with such solutions, how critical and how intentional should we be to this macroeconomic situation that the country is going through?
Yeah, and I think that the most critical thing is being able to see that we shouldn't take pride in having many SMEs. It's a good thing to have many SMEs, but I think the bigger question is how many of these are we transforming to the micro level? I mean, to the next level. Yeah, so that we are not just having the small and micro, but we are also having most of this transitioning. We know there was initiatives to have some of these SMEs become larger and even get listed at the stock exchange, at the securities exchange, but again, the question then begs: how are we being able to connect the dots so that we grow these SMEs to a level where they are able to, expand their businesses, attract higher capital injection? And to your question, I think when looking at the macroeconomic, that's what most countries focus on, because the very essence of opening a business or having an SME is everyone wants to grow their business to the next level. So if we are looking at that, how easy is it for these businesses to attract funding? Are we responding to the global trends? Are we responding to what the global markets are requiring of us as a country? And at the end of the day, these increases in taxes, how are they affecting our small businesses? And in my view, I think the government has got a lot to do there. Actually, the move to reduce taxes might be better. it might have a better impact in terms of the businesses and responding to what is happening globally, because most countries tend to be to reduce their taxes over time, and that helps create a very good operating environment for the small businesses.
Definitely. I'm glad you mentioned the issue of MSMEs, and us, we shouldn't be taking pride in having too many micro and small businesses. Could it be that one of the aspects is people tend to keep their businesses under those categories, other than a majority of which there are challenges with growth, financing, so you find majority of them by their third year, they're not surviving. But is there a particular incentive that is keeping these businesses small? And what are those barriers that we need to do away with to see more transition of micro and small businesses into medium-sized and large enterprises?
I think the biggest drawback is actually in terms of capital, ability to access capital. And then secondly, the whole supply chain, being able to ensure that these small and medium-sized businesses, as they mature, they're able to get access to global markets, bigger markets. So creating efficiency at the market level, being able to look at the whole supply chain, right from when these businesses are buying their products, the processing of those products, the selling of those products, and the access to even global markets. So I think that if that was addressed, then we would be able to see these companies transforming to even bigger companies. Access to capital. At the moment, you can see what's happening to our exchange rates and our interest rates. So again, that informs the cost of doing business even for the small scale traders. So if those aspects are looked at, on top of the tax environment, I think it would create a very good and conducive environment for business growth.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. I think it's very critical that we've looked into this issue of eTIMS and it being very critical in our businesses and on board.